Yeah, okay, welcome everybody to the latest iteration of our nutrition seminar series. We've got a couple of people online as well. I've already done a sound check there and they can hear us, and I will do my level best to monitor things that might appear in the chat should there an issue come up for you. But our speaker today is Dr. Juliet Bennett. She's a postdoctoral research fellow in the Sydney Centre for Healthy Societies and the Charles Perkins Centre. So you can see the title up there. I, for one, am quite keen to hear this because we get a little bit bio-focused in the groups over here. So it's nice to get the social science perspective as well, because availability of food is a prime determinant of what you actually end up eating. Yes. So that will be great. So Juliet has an interesting background that I'm not going to go through too much here, but apparently she wants us to plug a book. That's a traditional here. Reimagining Peace Through Process Philosophy. I think that when I was looking at your bio, is that something that goes all the way back to the North Carolina days, is it? Yeah. So I urge you all to have a look at that. And her interests are drawing connections across scales and subjects. So she hopes to contribute to improving public and planetary well-being by drawing those connections. And without any further ado, I will welcome Juliet to the stage and I will vacate the stage.
I'm going to hit start so I know how long I go for. I'm going to try and keep it to around half an hour. But thank you all very much for coming. I appreciate your time being here. I wanted to start by acknowledging country. Especially in the conversation of food, country is where our food comes from, and it connects us to our whole lives. And I acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, whose lands we are today, unceded lands, and pay my respects to elders past, present, emerging, and anyone here today as well. And I would just like to underscore the value of Indigenous knowledges and Indigenous perspectives, really with regard to everything I talk about today. Yes, so without further ado, hang on, let me make sure it's going to work. So there's a trick. Just that flick. There we go. On behalf of my research team, which is led by David Rubenheimer, Alex Broom, and Catherine Kenny, and it's been such a privilege to do this postdoctoral research with them. And this project has been really, truly collaborative from the outset. It's co-funded by Charles Perkins Centre's Jenny McKenzie Research Fund and the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences. And so just a bit of a signpost on where we're going today. Quite a standard kind of process background, conceptual framework, but really the background is the origins of our project. The conceptual framework is really about the first paper that we did together. Then I'm going to dive into the empirical work in lived experiences of the food system through the school lunchbox, and then drawing some implications for policy and research. So to kick off, we really started from David's work on the natural sciences and understandings of nutrition. Science knows what is a good diet. We know this, and yet poor diets are the source of so many early deaths, preventable deaths, so many health problems that prevail and are even accelerating around the world. And when David wrote his book with Stephen Simpson, Eat Like the Animals, he posed this question: why, when humans, we have the ability to create whatever food environment we want, why have we then created so much unhealthy nutrition and everything else that's come with that, inequalities, environmental degradation, so they go on. But why have we created such an unhealthy food environment? And that's where we kick off in a way. So we ask the question, what influences what we eat? And then who is responsible for that, which comes with that, which is where we tend in research and policy, we give guidelines, we tell people, well, this is your responsibility. You choose what you put in your mouth. But how much is really a choice. And this kind of captures that well. All these choices, but even Tim Gilson was like, how much of these choices are real food in a way? We kind of, our system of food has really changed significantly from a historical perspective. And aligning with the approach of Charles Perkins Centre, a complex systems approach helps us build this more integrative understanding of the problems of diet and health and food. So the World Health Organization also promotes this systems thinking approach that we've taken. And we were really looking at the relationships between actors, these interrelationships between actors and actors, the boundaries of the system, and what's beyond the boundaries? Who draws the boundaries? And how far does this go? And what are the very different perspectives of the food system? And today I'm going to focus on the perspectives of consumers, which was our stage 1 research. Then we'll go into, our research has started to engage alternative food movements and communities as the second stage, and the third stage, which we're kind of doing simultaneously, will be about engaging policymakers, researchers, and people working in industry. And we have focused in many ways on ultra-processed food, not just ultra-processed food, but ultra-processed food has been what was the starting point. And that's because in defining this, Carlos Montero in 2009 with a team of scientists observed this wave of Western foods, prepackaged foods, ultra-processed foods made in factories. And with that, a wave of non-communicable diseases, obesity, and illnesses that weren't there before. And so that transition happened faster in Brazil than it did maybe in other countries. And so it was just so clear to them. And that framing and classification of foods according to the nature of their processing and even the purpose of their processing has now spread and is quite a well-known idea. And so the harms of ultra-processed food come from many different places. And of course, not all ultra-processed foods are equally bad or harmful. It comes down to the mix of nutrients. It comes down to how much they displace other foods in the diet. It comes down to perhaps their additives and things that are added that we're slowly uncovering are impacting our microbiome and our immune system. It comes down to this purpose. Why are they engineered? Are they engineered to get us hooked, perhaps? And for why? To maximize profit. So as they are stripped of protein, which is expensive, and this sort of the taste replicates that umami flavor that makes us want more and want more. And as David and Stephen's work in nutritional geometry tells us, this appetite for protein isn't satisfied. So we eat more and more. And then there's this issue of power and how that's influencing the power of this very profitable industry is influencing the food system and food governance, which is really sort of visually apparent in this Oxfam figure, whereby all of these amazing choices, these different brands, this array of choice is really, the power is so consolidated in the hands of not very many corporations, transnational, powerful, highly influential. But what is their intention? Is their intention to cause these health harms? Is their intention to feed the world and support health? Is it to provide foods that are affordable, convenient, and tasty? Or is it to maximize profit? And of course, that's in our current, the way that we've organized the food system, according to very much this sort of corporate food regime, as it gets called. That's a rule of the game. They're following the rules of the game in maximizing profit for shareholders in a highly financialized food system. And so the harms are then unintended consequences. They're not intended. And who's responsible? You put the food in your mouth. But who benefits from these harms is an important question. And that's where the work of many people here today, led by Alex and Katie and Michelle, Gabby and Nadine, this amazing paper, I feel like it was very central to what what kicked off my postdoc, which is on the administration of harm from unintended consequences to harm by design. And this paper, through different examples, not related to food, but related to health, focused on, sort of pointed out the way that unintended consequences gives an excusing condition for the inequalities and health inequities and all of these, the outcomes which are harms that we can foresee and can predict. And so maybe if we look at the interest that these are serving, then we can try to approach these. So what do we do about this? Well, our first paper was really about developing a common language and synthesizing a lot of the literature across our fields and fields that we hadn't entered before, really focusing on the food system. And there's amazing work that's been done within our university on this topic. And we asked, how are the harms of ultra-processed food allowed to proliferate? So we explored the different actors, the networks, the relationships, the social norms, practices, systems, and rules of the game that they operate within. And overall, we conceptualize this networked administration of harm, in which no single actor is solely responsible. Everyone is playing in these silos, playing by their rules and of what's normal for them. It's normal to earn profit. It's normal for governments to have a short-term focus and operate in silos. It's normal for all of these factors to be at play. And these structures, it's sort of this social scientific, the structures and the agents, and they both enter each other and they both constrain each other. And yet overall, we looked at this kind of misattribution of responsibility is really central to this the problems of the food system. And the ways in which corporate political activities such as lobbying and sponsoring sports events and having a seat at the table where decisions are made regarding food policy obfuscates what is actually seen and understood as being healthy. And we propose a prospective responsibility, so such that responsibility is about how much power you have to enact change and having that enabling a healthier future. But what we really then wanted to do, what do we do about this? Well, we wanted to start with parents' everyday experiences. Well, we wanted to start with everyday experiences, and we chose to look at parents. And the reason we did that was to get an intergenerational perspective and really just start with those everyday norms and how parents navigate this food system. And our overarching question, we're guiding all three stages, is what are the structural characteristics that make healthy eating necessarily a prefigurative activity when it should be the norm? Which is to say, why is healthy eating so hard when it should be supported and made easy? So today I'm going to focus on what we found by speaking to parents. And specifically in this area, we're looking at what are parents' experiences of the food system and their experiences navigating this. And we recruited via social media, primarily a Facebook ad. So we accessed parents across Australia in all the different states and different circumstances, selecting for as much diversity as we could, which we had a very diverse range of cultural backgrounds involved. There was a gender imbalance, which replicates other structures, even though we tried so hard to recruit as many fathers as we could. But what we did, we kept interviewing until well and truly past a point of information power to answer the questions. And we just saw the themes and findings repeated over and over again. And so in the quotes that we de-identified the transcripts, coded them, and analysed them as a team. And so of our papers so far, I'm giving a sneak preview to particularly one paper that's due to come up very soon, had very minimal changes, so any date now. I'm going to tell this story through a series of illustrative quotes. But I want to emphasize that each quote is more than just one person's story. Each quote is representative of stories that we heard over and over and over again. We've just selected one because I had too many slides, and it's kind of so many things that we could illustrate each point with, but we'll just select a few. So now into the findings, what did we find? And before I actually really delve into that, I want to ask you all a question. What did you pack in your lunchbox or your child's lunchbox? Maybe yesterday, because we're having lunch after this seminar. What was good and what was bad in that, in the experience of packing it, in what's included, in your judgments of what's in there, and what influenced the contents? How organised did you have to be on the weekend, or was it the night before, or in the morning in mad rush, or did you just buy lunch out? And where in the foods that you actually ate for lunch, where did those foods come from, and what processes, where were they grown, what processes were involved, and where did that happen, and how did this food end up in your mouth? And how do these kind of questions, these kind of pictures make you feel? So unpacking the school lunchbox, and I'll get to why we looked at the school lunchbox, but to put one lunchbox up there, which was mine on a good day, I can't usually afford blueberries, and yeah, when I look at this, I cringe because I see so much more than just an ordinary box of food, not only the nightmares that go before and after in the planning and the buying and the waste, but I see so much because I'm studying this and I've spoken to parents, and there is so much, and this is what we'll be unpacking, but there's so much in a school lunchbox, and so much that's, ends up being, this gets wasted, there's, the bread, the ham, is that okay, is it not? Some Vita gummies, I mean, what the heck is in them anyway? But it's like this navigation and attentions that unfold between a parent or parents and children. And I know ultra-processed foods are not good, but at least to make it into a lunchbox every day. And there's some health stuff. I might try and make myself feel better, but I also wonder when I look at the ingredients, what are these doing over time? And so the lunchbox problem appeared early in the interviews, and they came up when I asked about what are the challenges that you find, and parents were like, an absolute nightmare. It's all about school lunches. These are so problematic. And as we analysed, well, what is this challenge? We found that so many of the other key themes across the interviews were implicated in this simple everyday object and the surrounding practices. And so for this particular focus, we asked, how do parents' everyday encounters with school lunchboxes reflect and shed light on evolving food systems issues? And the first point is really this feeling of failing. So there's this feeling that you're being judged as a parent, how much you love your child, how good you are as a child, by what is in the lunchbox and what is eaten by the child. So Charlotte, you might be surprised to know, was actually a mother of 1-year-old twins. And she said, I am not going to be happy if someone comments on what I'm giving my child. And so I was, taken back. Okay, you've already got this premonition. Wow. And she just said, it's circulating among parents. Everyone talks about these judgments and, judgments from teachers or, and obviously you want to feed your kid the best food. So you probably already have a level of guilt about it. But parents are set up to fail in a way so we know all of these systems factors. We know there are these commercial determinants of health. We know there are socio-economic determinants of health and what ends up being eaten. But the responsibility is felt on you as a parent for the whole thing in your individual everyday practices. So there's this sort of trifecta of challenges of time, budgets, and what children eat that came up again and again and were implicated so strongly in the lunchbox, which is like the contents of the carrots or anything that goes in that is slightly perishable or healthy just comes back or slimy and uneaten. So there's this food waste that parents have to also go, well, do I just keep doing this and just put it in the bin? Or, there were some parents like, well, my child has to eat it when they get home. And you try and do that, but how hard do you push? And so there are these really complex interpersonal relationships, but they're really constrained by what peers are eating. If every child was eating that food at lunch, that would be one thing. But when your friend's eating the packet of chips, you don't want to eat the carrots, you want the packet of chips. And so there becomes this whole focus. And when you run out of options because you can't give food that gets heated, it won't stay cold, you just put processed food. It's the answer. It's cheap, convenient, and the kids eat it. But I also want to emphasize it's not just about ultra-processed food. And the guilt comes from all sorts of aspects of navigating food. Because as this parent talks about, Amara, so she said, just wonder about the wax and how they distribute and how many pesticides is in one apple. And if I don't have time, because how does it stay fresh that long? And if I don't have time to wash it properly, and whether you can even wash that wax off is another question. How does this affect her son's body? Not now, but in the long term. And you as a parent, you have that guilt. And of course, these sort of things don't just apply to parents. We are all in an environment that is rushed, in which time is this commodity. And, the time that you spend cooking for yourself is time you're not spending earning money or doing something else that you want to do. And so there really are so many factors at play that can be understood through this lens. And this comment really captures this sort of predicament of responsibility, where a parent feels this weight and feels like a failure when they also were the parents we spoke to were very aware of these commercial factors. How can I learn to be healthy and eat healthy? And how can I teach my child to eat and be healthy when I'm up against a multi-billion-dollar organization that focuses more on getting me to spend my money than keeping me alive? And so these factors, these economic rationalities, that economics is more valuable than health, are unfolding in this way, and yet responsibility is placed on parents and experienced and felt as their responsibility. And school food environments are a really big part of this story, because food school environments are also replicating this kind of devaluing of food. They only have this short window to eat, which came up again and again as being part of the reason that children don't eat all of the contents of their lunchbox. So school food environments prioritize learning, which is separated from food. And I mean, not always, but in general, it's kind of segmented. And children, of course, would prefer to play than eat. And that's what many, many participants were talking about, how the structure of school lunches, and someone talking about the reverse school lunch, maybe they should play first and then eat. But parents who had grown up in other cultures and countries described other institutions where, particularly in France and Italy, for example, everybody was fed the same thing on a real plate with real cutlery and able to name what's on their plate. They sat around a table socializing and valuing food for half an hour or more, eating, and then had a whole chunk of half an hour or more of play. And people talking about in Japan where kids are actually part of the process. They go and get the food, they set up change the schoolroom into a dining room, eat, and then clear up. And you think of all those life skills and the ways in which food can be valued through the food environment, through these structures that we put and develop around through schools and from beyond throughout society. And then there are ways in which this reproduces our food culture as well. So I eat at my desk a lot of the time. That's a normal thing because I have more important research to do. This really brings into question what we value And how do we value food? Is food just a fuel? Is it a tick box? Is it something we just need to get done? So we're at a party, better just give the kids some sausages so that we can get on with socializing. And this is perhaps a very Australian thing. It's these are the norms, and this is my life anyway. And it was what we were hearing from many of these participants. And I really like this quote. It's not that. I'm going to get to it because I like this quote. It's a left and right. It's a bombard of this stuff. And it's very much, if you want to follow a healthy lifestyle, it's like you become the odd. She was Italian. And, it's just normal. This is what is normal in our society. And by doing this research, we start to look at what is such a normal everyday object and start to see it very differently. And so I'm going to go back to the canteen, because the canteen nuggets or chicken fingers came up again and again as an example of the normalization of a certain type of food. And because she worked in the canteen, she had this overarching view. The number one biggest seller is the bloody chicken nuggets. It's frozen chicken nuggets. I don't think these nuggets have ever seen a chicken. Although they have salad and salad sandwiches on the menu, I never, ever made one. And I think that's an important message and to think about, that, we can institutionalize that canteens have to have this range of food. But if you've got the option on the menu to have the chicken nuggets, what's the point in having the others other than to make ourselves feel better? And parents talked about these sort of social norms being so powerful, because you care about your child's socializing, you care about how they feel amongst their peers, and you don't want them to feel the odd one out. And sometimes there were stories there was one in particular of a mum who's like the sausages at the sports carnival and soccer, and then they have lollies and they have this, again, this bombardment. And she said, I won't do it. And I said, well, how does that go down when you resist? And she said, actually, parents are relieved. They say, I don't want my kid eating this either. Thank you for, resisting. So there are stories of resistance, but it's really, really hard. And you also care about the relationship with your child, and how, your child thinks you're a bad parent if you don't give them the food that's tasty as well. So there's so many different factors that come into play. But, the marketing and normalization starts really early with marketing and packaging foods that target kids of 2 years old with Bluey. Why is there a Bluey? Many people talked about these very ordinary crackers that have Bluey on it, that don't even have Bluey on the actual cracker. And they're going, why is this marketed? It's just, wheat and additives and salt and whatever and sugar. And why is this being targeted at my child? Of course, my child wants it because they love Bluey. So that really leads us into this frustration that parents have with marketing and packaging, and the lack of trust that's developing with regard to our food system. And sometimes parents would say, well, my parents just trust what's in the supermarket because surely the government would only allow foods that are healthy to be available. There's very different perspectives. And she was like, well, she couldn't trust what was out there. And there's a lot of frustration about what gets passed as healthy and what gets promoted as healthy on the front of the packages, spouting all of these amazing things. This is organic, and then you look at the ingredients and you're like, why is this promoted as in this misleading way? And then while the back of packages is very useful and important information, parents are left to navigate that information on their own, and most of it is very hard to decipher. Michelle said, I feel like you almost need a degree in all the numbers to be able to understand what's in the food, to then be able to make the choices of what you're doing. And examples were given about MSG, which has about, I don't remember how many different names that you can use to pass off MSG in a food. And so because, you know, the companies caught onto the fact that people were looking for numbers that started with a certain number and trying to not buy foods with that number. And then they start using other fancy names that refer to the same ingredient. And how is that allowed to happen? And this is really about these commercial forces and the issues that we discussed in that first paper. And we were seeing these themes come up again and again. And the awareness of parents of these issues that we were unpacking through our research and thorough literature and concepts, the awareness is really remarkable of these systems forces that are working against them, such as Miller and talking about the Nestle's and all of the two or three that have such an influence on what's produced, on the farmers, and on the governments via, you know, massive donations and all of this. So it's tricky. And the duopoly of Woolies and Coles unsurprisingly came up in many interviews as hampering and being unhelpful for environments, for farmers, the monocultures. That it was a really remarkable, the coverage and the awareness of all of these issues. And the amount of ideas that parents had for solutions was also really, really exciting, really. Someone said they just need to have parents, sort of everywhere needs to have a box where parents can give their suggestions, because parents' voices are heard. And this is really a question of who's at the table when decisions are made. And in terms specifically of school lunches, looking at what is being done in different countries, and where is a proper lunch being done well, and how is that having an impact on the population, but not following what's being done in the US, or what in terms of what was perceived as being a bad example of unhealthy food, even if it's provided. And the resonance with where we'll be going with regard to lots of different policy ideas. And I just put one quote because it covered quite a few of these points, but you know, there were quite a few people who were talking, well, maybe they should tax what's bad and subsidize what's healthy. Why not? And you know, and there were people who were talking about, well, they shouldn't even have you shouldn't even have Coles and Woolies, or 95% of what's in Coles and Woolies should be proper food and 5% other stuff, rather than what is currently seen as the other way around. Using tax funds to support health rather than big corporations, health star ratings, and you know, there shouldn't even be some health star for a mud cake, for example. Is misleading, gives a false sense of health. The labelling regulations, and I'll put this one in for all the scientists. Listen to the scientists. Government should listen to the scientists. So sort of to see where we are and recap where we've come from, we looked at the moral judgments of parents who have felt this individual responsibility and feel that so deeply. And then the institutions that work against them, from the time and lack of time that they have to cook and the lack of time a child has to eat, and how this devaluing of food is reproduced through the school lunchbox practices, and how this socializing of what is normal is working against what is healthy. And these massive commercial forces and lack of governance, but the possibilities for much more helpful governance. Overall, the message being that food is a battle that individuals cannot win on their own. And people even use that language. They're like, you can't win if a majority is against you. So as we look to the future, there is very exciting work being done internationally and nationally, research and others on like the policy space and the possibilities for policies to make a really big difference in these structures. And that seems to be very much centered around schools as a location is one of the big areas, regulating marketing, rethinking subsidies and taxes, and warning labels that warn against high salt, warn against high fat, warn against or trans fats, warn against the ingredients that shouldn't be consumed by children. And that's disincentivizing the purchase, and also is a much clearer message for children rather than, oh, this has a health star, or this ice cream has 3 health stars, and it's very hard for parents. But also going beyond that to think about these really big systemic forces. How do we move beyond these economic rationalities that ultimately how these policies unfold at the moment will battle against the economic rationalities that corporations that don't want these to happen, and instead, how do we look at making health more of a priority than these economic factors, and moving from the assumption that scale and centralization is the only way for solutions to unfold is a really important part. If you're in research in agriculture, for example, doesn't have to have a commercializable, scalable solution, but where can the optimal scale? Where can solutions that work with communities and work across multiple scales come from? And moving, of course, key message of today, from individual responsibility to shared responsibility. So coming back to the questions at our opening, what influences what we eat and who is responsible? We've really seen how the problems of the food system converge in the school lunchbox, experienced in each and individual household, every morning, every night, the waste, but it's clearly shared. This is a shared nightmare. It's a shared experience. And so with these multiple scale solutions, how do we come together and treat this problem differently? What happens when we look at it as a shared responsibility? And so this lunchbox ends up being a symbol of so much more than a lunchbox. It's a symbol of even our tendency to individualize what is a collective and social problem. So coming back to as well, the question that we started with, and the topic of today's talk, the value of social sciences in food system research. And we can see how our food system has evolved. And social sciences helps us answer these questions. How did we get here? What parameters constrain us? And what are social rather than individual problems? And I think really, how do we work together as we've been doing, and as we, through things like this series and the interdisciplinary work of Charles Perkins Centre, and moving beyond that as well with working with communities and working with policymakers to bring these voices together and these change to create healthier futures. So thank you very much. And thank you everyone.
Thank you very much, Juliet. That was fabulous.
Stop.
Are there any questions from online before I go to the floor? No? Okay. From the floor. Yes, Achita.
That was amazing, wonderful talk and very good perspective on food. I really liked your idea of looking at food through the lens of how we eat our food and the cultures and the ways in which we tell our children. And do you think that could be one of the way of changing our food habits, like when we were growing up, setting up the table, or when our moms are preparing the food, just watching the pot and stuff like that was a big part of learning for all of us. So what do you think?
Yeah. Oh, okay. So the question is, can we change what we eat by how we look and practice food on a day-to-day basis? So how we set the table, how we enable food. And yes, absolutely, I agree. And I think that the point of how we look at food is so important. So, at the moment, this treating of food as a commodity rather than as a right, for example, treating it as fuel rather than what you're describing there as social and fundamental. And so how do we do that and enable that is a real structural question, because parents talk about just being so tired because they've worked such long hours and they're just rushing home, and then the kids are hungry, and it's like the systems forces that work against us. So how do we provide the space and the time for us to be able to sit and set the table and enable those practices and those intergenerational habits as well. Participants were talking about how, like the French participant was talking about how she just worries about the future generation because she was able to learn cooking and value food, but now, and so she's like, this isn't just not normal and you can't do anything about it. She's like, I'll just not look while my son eats the Nutella because he's hungry. Otherwise, what do you do? And, I think it is really about setting, like you're describing there, like setting the table, setting the structures, setting the options, and how you do that in a really positive way. Because when this is experienced as a battle, it's really, it's a battle you can't win. So but it just requires kind of stepping out and thinking about the structures that constrain. And then I think as researchers, it's like, how do we change some of those structures? I don't know if that answers your question, or I welcome any thoughts.
So I have a quick question. So you brought up the health stars thing quite a bit. I gather that was because it came up in the interviews quite a lot. And I would have said that I'm not a great fan of it, but I still would have said that the health star system was one of the few ways that we can genuinely incentivize the food industry to change the nature of their products.
Yeah.
So I'm curious as to what was coming out. Is it really, because the food industry will say there's an incentive for us to add fibre, reduce salt, sweetness, etc., and then we get a higher rating, and that will be more marketable. Is that actually something that's happening on the ground? Are people seeing that as better or not?
Look, some people who understood and that would be one or two people who actually understood that the health star system is a comparison against foods in a certain category, said, look, if I'm comparing A and B and they're the same thing, I'll go with the one that's got the healthier, more stars, and that's useful. But overarchingly, people were just like confounded by it. They're like, why are there 5 stars on Milo? Or why are there 5 stars or 4 stars on an ice cream? Not really necessarily knowing, okay, well, it's 4 stars compared to other ice creams. And then, so there was like a sort of questioning why are these, and particularly, so a couple of participants brought up the Yuka app, which people go around and scan and gives you a lot more details about why something it gives a ranking, but gives details of why it might be, I don't know, 80 out of 100 or 0 out of 100, and goes into the additives in such detail. And I think because resources like that are coming up, they're like, this product is really natural. It has 4 ingredients, nothing, all natural, and then it's got 3 stars. And this other one, like this flavored yogurt, has 5 stars, and it has all of these ingredients that I don't even know what they are. So it's a really real feeling of corporations gaming the system, and I think this layered distrust that's coming up. Yeah.
Thanks, Hal, and thanks, Andy, and thanks, Juliet. One of the, I suppose, strengths of science in general is our ability to quantify things.
Yes.
And of course, by the nature of the work you do, you need to talk to people and you need to understand what's going on within family units and then expand. So I'm just curious to know how you view quantifying the problem and to keep track of change, whether things are getting better or worse, and also to, I suppose, to describe to government, just the depth of the size of scale of the problem.
Yeah, thanks, Arthur. It's absolutely essential. We need to quantify and qualify. We need the both to come together. And I think sometimes it's really important to start with the data and then go into empirical work. And sometimes it's good to start with the empirical work and the lived experience and then go into the data. And I think it's an iterative process. And the more that they talk together, I think the more powerful it is, because, I think it would be great to do a survey on the back of this work and then see, okay, we've identified through our in-depth interviews, we identified this, let's see how much that resonates. And then that'll be a really powerful number to bring to government so that we have an understanding of the representation side of things. So I agree. And then sometimes, to start with with the data, identify some of the problems, but then also, you know, it's this iterative process because what assumptions are being made before that data is developed as well. So I think the social sciences and natural sciences, quantitative and qualitative, really work so well together, and it's certainly, yeah, important.
Take another question.
Yes.
One thing that I don't hear much about, that doesn't necessarily mean it doesn't exist, but is the notion of a food budget. Just because ultra-processed foods aren't foods that we should only eat doesn't necessarily mean that they're foods we should not eat. And so I'm just curious to know your thoughts about what a food budget might actually look like, where foods of the ultra-processed variety might quite safely be eaten at sort of 5%, 10% of total energy intake.
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. And look, what it brings up for me is how would that be socialized? Because, and so a lot of the participants were talking about moderation, sometimes foods, and language around foods, and you know, we try not to use bad foods and good foods. We try not to even use unhealthy and healthy. There's sometimes foods and there's everyday foods, but then there's very different understandings of what is a sometimes food. Can you have one sometimes food every day? If it's a different, what about if it's a different sometimes food? Can I have 3 different sometimes foods today and have different, you know? And so there was also this sense of what is moderation is really difficult and is different for each person. And there are also very different understandings of health out there and different bodies that have different health requirements as well. And there are different roles for ultra-processed foods within that. That purpose question, I think, is an important one when it comes to, well, is the purpose of this ultra-processed food to support health or to support just profit-making by, you know, so I guess, yeah, a food budget is a really interesting one. It does sort of, it's like leaving it with the individual to, you know, decide how much discretionary food should be part of their diet is still just, I don't know. I think we also need to deal with the systems that constrain that.
Thanks so much, Juliet. That was such a wonderful presentation in so many ways, including as a parent. I was wondering whether you are currently in Australia. I think this research has a lot of potential to be used as an advocacy piece for school lunches, for example.
We're just at that point, finally. So I would really love to be speaking to policymakers. We have just got a pitch accepted for the conversation, which is really exciting. And so now, just as these papers will get across the line, we've got something to speak to as well, and then be able to build on that. And yeah, and through the Facebook ad, I was able to connect with some parent organisations and who were doing really strong advocacy. And so I can see I'm getting insights into the landscape, but I would like to be much more embedded in conversations with policymakers. Yeah, and the alternative food communities as well. So these next steps. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
So I was wondering, I guess that you do, like, food is about pleasure and joy and taste. And I've had one of those sandwiches compared to the nuggets, and they don't taste good. I'm going to take the nuggets. They're boring. Like lettuce, tomato with no flavouring on a piece of white bread. So I was wondering, was there any talk about, well, at the micro level, or well, how do you make healthy food taste good? Because I mean, I think that's such an important part of the conversation, is food is about taste. So as an intervention, did parents talk about, well, how do you make healthy food something that is pleasurable and joyful and fun, like nice to eat? And And were there conversations about that, like kind of the like really common sense things that food does for us in some ways?
Yeah, there were definitely conversations about that. And I think like how to make it tasty, how to make it fun. And it, I think, was really culturally embedded, and people from different cultures having different approaches to it. And so I guess the battle against ultra processed foods and how that becomes this hyper tasty kind of bliss point ambition versus tasty and kind of home cooked food. But I think maybe because of the focus on challenges and obstacles and enablers, so our questions were looking at different factors that influence. And I guess under influences, parents were talking about that they want taste. Some parents were talking about the foods that they like and the foods the kids like. So I guess it really comes into play in the preferences point. And so so that the scope for agency and influence also, which is another paper we're writing with Holly, is about how preferences, and which is where really taste comes in, are influencing what ends up on the table. So where it might have been more, I cook this and this is what everybody eats, there is a sort of a maybe empowered by the marketing situation and the norms that are set with chicken nuggets. Kids are like, well, no, I'm not eating that. I don't like, spicy. I don't like anything that's not separate or not beige color, or, all these different factors that are kind of part of development. So, but taste is all, and there was a comment that kind of stuck with me from this father who was talking about he just likes tasty foods and they eat out all the time, and that's what they like to do, And so definitely, I guess there's different aspects of the taste. It's a good one.
Thanks, Juliet. There's been lots of talk about provision of school lunches in Australia by the schools.
Yes.
Especially in the dietitian circles, but I'm not actually sure where we're at with that kind of rolling out or testing or evaluation. Could you talk a little bit about that, where we're at, and do you agree with this? What would it look like? Why aren't we doing this already? So many questions.
Yes, thank you. So Tasmania is leading the way on rolling out pilot that has been expanded, and it's just very exciting to see that. Every year I look into, where's this at? And it's like, another 50 schools or something. It's like, wow. So I think there's this interstate possibilities. And my understanding is, the occasional school experiments with it. And there are even programs like this, the advocacy group that contacted me through the interviews, who have done pilots with, okay, let's let children bring their main lunch, like the sandwich, and we'll, for this period of time, just take care of everything else. So that gets rid of the packet food. And they're like, okay, we'll do fruit platters or vegetable platters with dips. We'll do smoothies. And so really celebrating like fresh foods. And that seems like another opportunity or way to do something as well. But I think the more that parents can be involved, and the more, because I do think we need to think about the time that's allocated as well for lunch. And so bringing it up really does raise a few other questions, but I think this research is useful in pointing to some of those elements that can play in. And it's also part of an international conversation where other countries are rethinking their model as an intervention in sustainability as well as health.
Yeah, you should definitely show that lunchbox with all the factors going into that, because that was quite powerful. So when you're in the room with some policy makers.
Yes.
While we're on that one, one of the things that didn't really come up so much in the talk was the trade-off between people's perceptions of risks. So you gave us the graphs of increase in obesity that came along with processed foods, but not the graphs that showed the decrease in food poisoning, foodborne infectious diseases, malnutrition, etc.
Yes.
So we've traded one set of risks for another one.
Yeah.
And school lunches in Indonesia is a very good example of where you definitely need to balance those risks because they've had enormous blowback from what's actually probably a very small number of cases, but you've only got to get one disease outbreak.
Yeah.
So do people have that balance? Do they actually consider the things that are improved by the food system as opposed to made worse?
Yes. Well, I mean, I think we're thinking about it. I don't know how much it came up for participants in terms of, we weren't really asking about their sort of thoughts on the world obesity as much, but I think the trade-off between safety and health is really important. And I think we are so often prioritizing the immediate safety of food, and that comes into, food that can't be put in the fridge. I mean, would you send sushi to school for a kid because the rice is outside and that's unsafe? And so I think that it's a big factor and a very interesting one.
But one last question.
Thanks, Julia. That was so good. I really, really enjoyed it. I just had a question about cost and budget of these lunchboxes. Because obviously there's a cost of living crisis that will obviously impact what goes into these lunchboxes, school dinners, that obviously would have a cost. How much do parents think about that, and how much does that influence their decision making? There's a time money conundrum as well. You might have families that are more well off but don't have time. So where does this kind of cost?
Massive. Yeah. Massive point. And it came up, every interview talked about the price of things, the price of food going up, cost of living going up, the trade-offs they have to have, comments, everything that's expensive, that's unhealthy is cheap, everything that's that's healthy is expensive. And, that needs to be unpacked a little bit because, of course, sometimes fresh food is cheaper than the packaged food, and sometimes, soft drinks can be expensive but justified, and so that there's a lot. And there was a social worker who was talking about these aspects as well and how they unfold for families. But I think there's a willingness, there is a massive cost and it influences what ends up in the lunchbox. Also, the UCAR rated healthier packaged foods are twice the price of the cheap ones, and so these are trade-offs that parents are making all the time, and in the end, people just want healthy food to be affordable and accessible, and to have the time and the space to be able to cook and eat healthy food. And that is really simple in the end, what people really need, and that's what governments really need to support. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you once again for a fabulous talk and for having the grace and time to answer a large range of great questions. So we had a lovely debate. I'm not sure, is it a month?